Okay. Parshas Matos, Lamed Beis Aleph. Umikte Rav Hoylev Ne Ruven Ne God Otzemot. The tribes of Reuven and Gad had enormous amount of livestock. Vayiru es Eretz Yazer, es Eretz Hagilot, v'hinei hamokom makom mikneh. And when they saw the land of the Yazer and Gilad, this was the conquered territory from Ogun Sichon. This was on the Transjordan side. They saw it was a location for grazing. V'yavo b'nei Gad uv'nei Ruven, v'yomer el Moshe, v'eloza Kohen. The members of the Gad and Ruven tribe, they came to Moshe, they said to Moshe, and Loza Kohen, Bel Nasir Ida Lemor. Atoros v'divo v'yaziv v'nimro v'cheshon v'olole usvav unvo v'on. The various cities which they conquered, Orza Shehika Hashem l'fnei Adas Yisrael Eretz Miknehi. All these locations are land for grazing, and your servants have livestock. If we find favor in your eyes, you should give this land to your servants as our portion. This is our portion. Meaning willing to pass on a portion of the land. Al tavireinu es hayarden. Don't force us to cross the Jordan. This is what we want our portion should be. So Moshe initially understood this to mean that the brothers can go conquer and fight all by themselves, and you're going to stay behind and reap the benefits of the land that already was conquered. This is the territory of Og and Sichon. Your brothers can go to war to conquer Eretz Yisrael, Canaan, and you're going to remain here. Okay. So it says the reason why initially they wanted to remain there was they had large herds and flocks, and they needed the grazing land. Therefore, they wanted to stay on the Transjordan side and not go across. Moshe initially thought they're not interested in participating in the conquest of Canaan. And that's what he said to them. You mean to say, you're going to stay here and let your brothers fight by themselves? So here, the Baal HaTurim first points out, initially when the Torah tells us that they had large herds and flocks, livestock, it speaks about Umikne Rav Hoyel Livnei Ruven, Livnei God, Otzemod. So it mentions Ruven before God. And then in Pasuk Beis it says, Vayavo Bnei God Ubnei Ruven. When they went to present the case to Moshe, the first ones to come were Bnei God and then Bnei Ruven. So why when we speak about the large number of livestock, we first mentioned Ruven, then God, and then when it comes to the request, it's Bnei God and Bnei Ruven. So if you take a look at the Baal HaTurim, Higdim Ruven initially, Vayoma Bnei God Bnei Ruven, Higdim Bnei God, and Letchila Higdim Ruven Shoya Godol, Vakach Higdim God, Shoya Hagiborim, Varugim, Nikorim. First it mentions Ruven because he was the firstborn. So in terms of status, Ruven's mentioned first. But in terms of the actual conquest, being able to conquer, God was stronger than Ruven. Tichsiv, V'terf Zura Afkodkod, Pam Niskum Nei Godum Nei Ruven, Parshazu, V'zer She'omar Nachlo Mvuheles B'rishono, V'achriso Lo Savoroch. It says, a portion that's taken as a result of eagerness ultimately is not going to succeed. You're not going to have bracha there. Here, because they were, the word is almost like greedy. They wanted this portion for themselves. That's Nachum V'Vuheles. We'll see the Midrash in a moment. Ultimately, blessing is not going to come upon that portion. You see, he says, because really the word should be vohelis, behola. Behola means in bewilderment, right? We say every morning, Shachris, lo neili, lo rik, right? And behola. Behola means person's confusion. So the word, the word in Mishlei is nachlo mevuchelis. It's written with a ches. Because it's mentioned 8 times that they want to take their portion before the rest of Klal Yisrael. They want this. Listen, what does it mean? Ultimately, you will not succeed. We find that Sancheriv exiled the 10 tribes. The first tribes that were exiled were Ruvain and Gad. So that's what I mean. Nachlam vuchelis. They were so eager and so anxious to have this portion because the money was so primary to them, the material. Therefore, ultimately, they were the first ones to go into exile. Therefore, that's the lo saborach. Ultimately, they will not be blessed. So over here is the Medrash. Medrash tells us and this is what we read on Tisha B'Av Daf Torah. It says, Ilamdeinu b'Rabbeinu, kama ma'atoros nivru b'olam. How many gifts were created in this world? Kachshanu Rabbeinu sholosh matonos bara kodesh baruch hu l'olam. The 3 gifts which are primary to this world: Chochma, wisdom; Gvura, power; V'osher, and wealth. So these are the 3 gifts. If you have one of these gifts, you take all the preciousness of this world. What is that? If you have wisdom, you have it all. You have power also. You have it all. When you have any one of these gifts, one is it's the equivalent of having it all. A Muslim is where it's a gift of heaven, and it's God's power. See something interesting. It's an endowment of Hashem. But if a person oversteps his bounds because you're greedy and you take it because you initiated it, it wasn't meant to be yours. Where do you find that? The Gemara tells us in Makos, in the path one wants to walk, Hashem takes you along that path. So there are times where it's not meant to be yours, but if a person wants it bad enough, you're able to overstep your bounds and take something which really you should not have. So if it's meant to be yours, Hashem predestined it should be yours. That's about Torah and Hashemayim. That's a gift of heaven. As a result of that, that will be a blessing. But something which is not a gift from Hashemayim, then what? It doesn't. It's worthless and not. It's detrimental. Shlomo tells us in Koheles, he sees what exists within this world. Just because people are swift doesn't mean say they're able to outpace someone else. And not for those who are powerful, they have victory necessarily in war. And we find people are very wise. They don't necessarily have bread. The Gamlola and the Nevona Moshe. A wise person should not pride himself in his wisdom. And a powerful person should not pride himself in his strength. Is the Navi. A wealthy person should not pride himself in his wealth. What should a person pride himself in? Haskalidosi, that he has the wisdom, and through that wisdom he came upon to understand me, to appreciate me. These gifts that if they don't emanate from Hashem, ultimately they're going to lose it. There were two wise men who existed. One was a Jew, and one was a Gentile. Achitophel from Yisrael. They had great wisdom. One was a Jew, one was a Gentile. Bilam, Achitophel from Yisrael. Achitophel was the Jew, and he's the one who assisted Avshalom to plot against David, to have David killed. That was Achitophel. And what was his objective? Because he believed that Malchus, that kingship, would come from him. So he was only using Avshalom to remove David from his position of power. Bilam Umas Olam. Bilam was the wise man of Dumas Olam. He was in Ushneim of Dumin Olam, and they both destroyed. Umina Olam Hazel Min Olam Abo. They forfeited both this world and the world to come. Shnei Giborim Omdu Olam. They were two powerful people, the most powerful in the world. Shimshon Yisrael. Shimshon was the Jew. The Goliath, Goliath, the giant. Shneim Omdu Min Olam, and they both were destroyed from the world. Shnei Ashim Omdu Olam. The two wealthiest people existed. One was a Jew, one was a Gentile. Korach Yisrael. Korach was the wealthiest Jew ever lived. And Haman was the wealthiest Gentile who ever lived. We're talking about somebody who was not a king. They both were destroyed. Korach and Lama. Why? What's the reason? This is the punchline. The gift was not a gift of Hashem. It's something they grabbed. They grabbed it. I mean, there are times that a person could overstep his bounds. I'll give you an example. Man was endowed with free choice. If a person chooses to steal, perfectly is a mafia person, gangster, and you steal and you plunder and you do terrible things and you accumulate tremendous wealth. That definitely is not the wealth that Hashem wanted you to have. Although the mafia person is very wealthy, that's called he grabbed it. Okay? There's no blessing in that wealth. Ultimately, it's going to come to an end. The times due to greed, whatever it was, that wasn't meant to be theirs. Haman, as much as he had, he didn't have enough. Bilam, he utilized his wisdom and he overstepped his bounds. Where do we find they were chotrim? They grabbed. When they go to Bnei Ruvain, the members of Gad and Ruvain, the tribes, Ashirim Harbe, they're very wealthy, and they had tremendous amounts of livestock. And they were enamored with their money, with their wealth. And therefore they chose to stay in Chutzlaretz. Whenever you want to say the Transjordan side is, there's certain laws which have a semblance of Eretz Yisrael. It's not Eretz Yisrael. It still has a semblance of Chutzlaretz. But they chose, due to their conflict of interest, because of their wealth, they said, we prefer to stay there than go there. Because the reason why they didn't go was due to their wealth. And they grabbed something which was not rightfully theirs. Therefore, they were first to be exiled. Shenemar. Quotes a posuk that the first ones to be exiled were Ruveni. Ernie, hear this? There's a posuk in Divrei Hayom. Ruveni, Godi, L'chatzi Shevet Menashe. Umi Goram Lehem. Why were the first ones to be exiled? Al Shefrishu Atzam Neracheim. Because they're willing to separate themselves from the rest of the Jews who their location was Eretz Yisrael. Why? For the sake of their wealth, their livestock, that was the priority. They're willing to remove themselves and not be together with the rest of Klal Yisrael. Where do we see this? The Torah introduces it because they had Mikne Rav, they had this tremendous wealth. which was primary to their lives, they're willing to give up the privilege to be with the rest of Klal Yisrael. Therefore, they were the first ones to be exiled, is the Midrash. So this is what the Baal HaTurim cites the Pasuk. The Pasuk is Nachlam Mevoheles, a portion that's taken through bewilderment, through this impulsiveness, this eagerness. Ultimately, it's not going to succeed. And he writes, the reading decree is mevohelis. The ksiv is written mevochelis with a ches. Of course, he says, B'nai Gad B'nai Reuven mentioned 8 times in this parsha regarding remaining on the Transjordan side. That was the eagerness, how bent they were on what? On having this, although it meant not being together with the rest of Klal Yisrael. They fought, they conquered with us. But where did they want to be? They wanted to be where their wealth was, even though it was meant to be detached from Klal Yisrael. Therefore, they were the first ones to want to go into exile 8 years earlier. But it's interesting. We always speak about, Maral, Rabbeinu Bachya, Zion is always connotes the natural order. Ches always connotes what? The supernatural. The letter which we mentioned, Ches 8 times, it's mentioned the B'nai Gad B'nai Reuven regarding wanted to stay on the Transjordan side in the parsha. Therefore, although the Cree, the way it's written is Mevoheles with a hey, but it's written with a Ches, because it's mentioned 8 times to show us to what degree they were driven for their money, which was primary. Because we see later when they said to Moshe Rabbeinu, we want to make corrals and fortifications for our livestock, and we'll build houses for our families. That's what they said. And then we'll cross the Jordan, fight with our brothers. So Moshe says you have your priorities mixed up. First, you talk about securing residences for your family, and then you talk about your livestock. But the way they stated their level of commitment, they're first going to build protection for the livestock, and then they'll build residences for their family. Moshe Rabbeinu says, I would just want to get clear. It's the other way. First your families, then your finances. So again, that reveals, we speak about the Freudian slip. The way a person speaks, very often that reveals volumes of where the person's coming from. And therefore, it was achrisa lo savor. Ultimately, there was no blessing. But what's ches? The ches, which is l'malam and ateva, something which is supernatural. That wealth was supernatural, was out of the ordinary wealth. We say Korach had one of a kind of wealth for a commoner. Haman had one of a kind of wealth for a commoner. What happened to them? That means something was out of the ordinary, which is ches, because it was grabbed. They seized it, therefore it did not succeed. But spirituality, where you recognize where it all comes from, you lived a life which is going against the grain, not being subsumed and consumed by the material, then the ches is eternity. That's then the ches, then God gives it. That's gifted by God. It's interesting. Gemara tells us in Shabbos and in Menachos that when God created the world, He created the world with 2 letters, Yud and Hey. Because David Belt says in Tehillim, with the letters Yud Hey, God formed the worlds. Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba. With the letter Hey, the spirituality of Hey, He created the physical world. And with the spirituality of the letter Yud, He created Olam Haba, the world to come. So Gemara asks, why did God choose the letter Hey? Because if you take a look at the structure of the Hey, on the right side the roof and the right leg are attached. On the left side, there's a slight separation between the left leg and the roof. Why? So the Gemara explains, what is this world? The person has bechira, has free choice. If a person chooses to go into free fall, anything you want, it's wide open. The world is wide open. Do with what you want with it. But what happens if the person goes into free fall, then he wants to do tshuva? Hashem leaves that opening on the left side that if you want to come back, you can come back. So the Gemara asks, why can't you come back from the same route that you exited? The Gemara says, because it's not going to work. A person's about tshuva. A person says, I'll maintain the same lifestyle except be kosher. No, you have to detach yourself from your past and assume another level of lifestyle, other values. You have to take on all kinds of fences. Well, since you breached so many fences, there's no way that you're able to come back in the same route that you exited. You have to come back through the opening on the left side. So we had the Ramak, Ramoshe Kudaviro writes in the Talmud Dvorah that he explains that a person who breached all the fences. Now, what kind of fence do you need? A person is a tzaddik, nobody's perfect. Shlomo says, there's no perfect human being. We all have blind spots. And because we have blind spots, therefore we need fences. Well, what kind of fence do you need? You don't need a strong fence. You just need a fence which is strong enough to alert you that you're getting too close to the edge because you didn't breach the fence. What about you've been a repeated offender and you breached those fences multiple times? That ordinary fence that would be enough for a tzaddik, that fence is not enough for the person who breached those fences multiple times. You need something, you have to really keep your distance. So therefore, when he comes back through the opening and he's by the roof. He keeps it, the roof, the top of the ches is the farthest point from the end of the hay. The roof of the hay is the farthest point from the bottom of the hay. He has to make a fence to the nth degree. Therefore, the openings on the left side, he has to come in by the roof. That's the degree of fence. If you utilize the ches, which was meant to be utilized for spirituality, which would fortify you and spiritualize you, but you invested it in the material, then you need the hay to come to what to return. You have to use the material, you have to win yourself in that material. And you have to create every fence and every level of distance to be able to do tshuva, otherwise it's not going to work. But you see something interesting from the Chazal and from the Psukim, that a person is able to grab something which is not considered a gift of God. You're able to overstep your bounds based on what we just said. Whatever path you want to choose, the times that even though it's not meant to be, you're able to activate a force to take something that you're not meant to have. And even though you have it, it's not going to be long lasting, because since Hashem didn't want you to have it, and you took it, so to say, illegally, doesn't mean say you were a mafia, but you misappropriated your life. And instead of investing in, let's say, Torah, you invested it in something which is material, therefore you merited the material, but that's considered you grabbed it. Hillel says in Pirkei Avos, Al tomo she'pone eshner, Shema lo tipone. Don't say when I'll have free time, I'll study, because you may not end up studying. So the Rambam in his commentary on Pirkei Avos says, you're involved in a certain business deal. You're building a company. You're building a business. When I finish building or finish with this deal, I'll study. Said Shammai had said something similar. What did Shammai say? Azi Torah Sekeva. When Hillel is saying this statement, in essence, it's a semblance of what Shammai said. What does it have to do with Shammai? Shammai says, one's perspective in life should be, Torah should be primary, the material is secondary. What does that mean? The material is only to facilitate the Torah, the spiritual. That's Asay Torah Keva Mlach Charai. That's Shammai. He'll say something else. Don't delude yourself. Don't say, when I have free time, when I finish the deal, I'll study, because that moment may not come. And the Rambam says it's one and the same. Now, if one's priority is this is Torah, so why does he engage in material? Only to facilitate the Torah. But if getting involved in the material will in any way interfere with the Torah, the person is not getting involved in that deal, in that material. Because the value of material is only within the context of Torah. That's its only value. That's what it's Torah Keva Mlach Charai. So now the Rambam is saying, but if the Torah is not Keva, what do you understand? Everything is, there's always a conflict. Now you're conflicted. So what's the value of material? The value of material is not Torah any longer. Because what's primary is not Torah. So what's the value of material? The value of material is to accommodate yourself. The moments to accommodate you have all the conflicts of interest. Say, when I finish this deal, I'll be able to study. What do you mean? It's the equivalent of the tail wagging the dog. It's not the dog wagging the tail. Lavdil. If Torah is primary, what do you mean when you have time, you'll study? The value of the deal is only the study. Otherwise, the deal has no value. So that person doesn't have that conflict of interest. But if it's not Torah Keva, if the Torah isn't primary, and you have other priorities, automatically you have these conflicts. You say, when I do the big deal and have sufficient money, I'll retire at the age of 40, I'll have all the time to work to study. But that may not come. Why? Because you always have that conflict of interest. You always see it through this distorted lens that everything is justified, because ultimately it's for that purpose. Mr. Glick used to tell over a story, but it's a semblance of what we're talking about here. A person has enough money, he should be able to sit and study his whole life. She says, why aren't you studying? He says, because I want to make enough money so my children should be able to study. That's what he says. I want to guarantee my children, my grandchildren should be able to study Torah. They shouldn't have any financial worries. Fast forward to the next generation. The next generation, the children are not studying. So you say to them, why aren't you studying? Because we want to guarantee that our children, grandchildren, they should be able to study. And every generation down the pike has the same credo. Reason why we're working and we're not studying, because we want to make guarantee the next generation should be able to study. But what is that saying? This is Shema Tipone. Because what is the primary? If the primary is Torah, there's no such thing as I'm doing it so my grandchildren to study. We say Chayecha Kodmin. If the Gemara says in Kedushin, if a person is a firstborn and he has a son, the firstborn, and he only has 5 silver coins to redeem himself, who takes priority in those 5 coins? You take priority. Because what relates to you personally, that takes priority over your son. Although it's an identical obligation, you have an obligation to redeem yourself, and the father has an obligation, Pidyon Aben, to redeem his child. But since you haven't been redeemed, you have first priority. So if it's Torah Keva, there's no such thing as I'm doing it, I'm not studying, so my son should study. What about yourself? The answer is this whole thing, you're deluding yourself. It's clear it's not Torah Keva. Because if your priority would be Torah, and that would be that is the essential, and the second is secondary, you don't get confused with this. I'll do it because I want my children and grandchildren to be able to study. So really, and that's what the Rambam's saying. What Hillel is saying and Shammai is saying is one and the same thing. If it's Torah Keva, And one doesn't say, when I have time, I'll be freed up, then I'll study. Because then you sing it backwards. Moshe Rachman, his family during World War II, or before World War II, they were in Tangiers, Morocco. That's where they were. And his parents were wealthy even then. His father was a wealthy man. And his mother, especially when the Jews were first sent to concentration camps, she was involved. The Nazis, Yamach Shemam V'Zichram, allowed certain things to get through. Jews sent packages when it was more like a labor camp, before it became a death camp. And she was involved, and she galvanized other women, and they would send packages to Europe to help these people, whether they were in the ghettos, and they let them come through, get through these packages. And Moshe Rachman, after the war, stayed there, and he was married, and he did kiruv. But where was he during the pre-World War II, during the war? There was a yeshiva in England. It was called Schneider's Yeshiva in London. Who was Rabbi Schneider? Rabbi Schneider was a Talmud of the Chofetz Chaim. In this yeshiva, he was there, and there's a person today, he's still alive. He's a man in his 90s, and he's like the posek in Israel. His name is Moshe Sternbuch, who's originally from Switzerland, the Swiss family. And he studied in Schneider's Yeshiva. They were friends. And Moshe Sternbuch became one of the leading Gedolim in Israel, published endless works in Torah, disseminated Torah. And Moshe Reichman was the great supporter of Torah. Nobody was able to match what he did. He, firstly, as I stated, he stayed after the war. He remained there to teach these Moroccan children Torah, to disseminate Torah. But ultimately, he went into business and he became this supporter of Torah, one of a kind. So Moshe Reichman said that when they were students together in Schneider's Yeshiva, Moshe Sternbuch was given the responsibility to wake up the students, because they had a seder before davening, they should wake up to learn. His responsibility was to go to the bakery and pick up fresh bread every morning, so the students should have fresh bread to eat for breakfast. That was his responsibility. And these responsibilities were given by the Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Schneider. So Moshe Reichman said it on himself. He says, because Moshe Sternbuch was given the responsibility to wake up the students to study Torah, he merited to be this great Torah sage. I only provided the bread so the students should have what to eat. They should have fresh bread. Therefore, I didn't merit the siyata d'shmaya that my friend, my colleague, Moshe Sternbuch merited. That's what he said about himself. That the reason why he was put in a different location or different function is because the schus that one had, he didn't have that same schus. So he saw it, he didn't have the schus to be in a position to be a disseminator of Torah. That's the way he saw it. There's a story when he wasn't well, and Rabbi Osband, should live and be well, traveled to Toronto to see him. Although he wasn't as wealthy as he was, but he was still giving substantial money when he wasn't well. And it was known, whenever anybody would call his office, he would pick up the phone himself. The secretary did not pick up the phone. He picked up the phone. Because he didn't want anybody to feel very often, who's calling. Never, that question was never asked. It was always he picked up the phone himself to give the courtesy to the person, to give him that sense of value. The person's calling. So Rabbi Osman goes to Toronto, and he goes to his home, to Moshe Reichman's home, and they said you have to wait a half an hour, which was unusual. So after half an hour, he comes out, and he meets him in his study or in his whatever room in the house, and he apologizes that he made Rabbi Osman wait. Why did he make him wait? because he wasn't well and he was in pajamas and robe and in slippers. He felt it was inappropriate for him to meet Rabbi Osman wearing those kind of clothing. So it took him a half an hour to get dressed, to put on a suit, his vest, his tie. And it took him a half an hour because he felt it was not respectful to meet Rabbi Osman, who was Rosh Hashiva, who he knew for many years, in that mode of dress. So a person who has that level of reverence for Torah, I mean, it displays itself. Another person says, I'm not well, do my best. To spend an hour making the effort, it's too much. It wasn't too much. Because when it comes to Torah, it's nothing too much. There's a story where Rav Shach asked the Reichman brothers, Moshe Reichman and his brother, his name was Barry Reichman, to come to see him in Israel because he wanted to build a project, housing for Evreichim, for Kolo people. And it was an $80 million project. Okay? And they flew on their private jet, especially for this. And that day that they arrived, there was a father the son was me bar mitzvah, and he says to Rav Shach, I'm very concerned. My son, he doesn't have this ishmak, he doesn't have that desire to learn, and therefore I'm concerned he's not going to be fully invested in learning. What am I supposed to do? He says, something. Leave your son with me for an hour, and let me try to deal with him and give him the taste of what Torah really is. So Rav Shach then already was a man in his upper 80s, early 90s, and he spent an hour with this 13-year-old boy learning whatever he's learning with him, to show him the sweetness of Torah. So after he finishes with the boy, he says to the boy, do you understand now what I'm talking about, why Torah is so sweet? The boy says, now I have that geschmack. I will commit myself to do my best to become this great Talmid Chacham. That's what he tells Rav Shach. Rav Shach invested tremendous amount of effort in this boy. Who was waiting outside? The Reichman brothers. And they flew specially to be involved in this $80 million project, which they gave the majority of the money. Rav Shach comes out and he welcomes them. He says, sorry, can't see you. I just expended all my ability in this young boy. Come back tomorrow. Hear this? Could you imagine? We're coming to give you $80 million, made a special trip, took out time from our business, and then you tell us you spend that effort and that energy in this 13-year-old kid, and we should come back tomorrow. We're the makers and the shakers of the world, and tell me to come back tomorrow. How would have the average person taken that? It's an insult. They said, no problem, we'll be back tomorrow. So what does that say? They were totally subordinated and negated to Das Torah. If that's what Rav Shach did, and that's why he chose to allocate his time, no problem. We accept it, we'll come back tomorrow. And whatever they were going to discuss the first day, they discussed the second day.